Hello everyone. Welcome to this episode of CPO Perspective. I'm delighted to welcome Sachin Kotecha of the Jockey Club as my guest. Sachin, hello.
Hey Richard, how you doing?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. And perhaps you'd just like to tell us what you're doing at the moment.
So currently I am head of procurement at the Jockey Club, which is the biggest name in UK horse racing. So we own 14 different race courses, and then a range of other properties, hotels, estates, the stud, in the UK. So I've been doing that for the last couple of years.
Nice. Well, look, as always, the route by which, heads of procurement and CPOs get to be there is surprisingly varied. Perhaps you'd like to share your journey into procurement. I mean, did you start as a small child wanting to be a CPO, or did it go a different way?
I think I wanted to be a football player, if I'm not mistaken, but then that didn't go very far. Um, to be honest, I mean, procurement's quite funny because everyone I talk to kind of falls into it in some way or another. But I've pretty much been there from the beginning, so to speak. But I did a bachelor's in economics because it was pretty much the broadest thing I could think of, which wasn't really committing me to go anywhere. Still didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. So I did a master's in international business and was pretty much at the same point where I thought there was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't really want to do, which was all around finance, tax, audit, accounting, which didn't really sound too appealing to me to do it as a career for 40 years. Um, and I actually got interested predominantly in supply chain, actually, in terms of being able to have a job where you could kind of see real world impact. So I joined Centrica on what was called a procurement and supply chain graduate scheme, but ended up being pretty much 100% all procurement, which, lucky for me, has been a good fit. So I started off at British Gas. I was there for around 2.5 years. Graduate scheme is obviously a great way to kind of find your way into a business.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time going across all of their business units, operations, and then pretty much buying everything from dog handlers and locksmiths to smart meters to smart home technology.
Right. Got you.
So it was a great time. And then transitioned a little bit through industry after that. I went to work for Capita back in 2019 when they were going through a restructure as part of a new procurement team they built out, which I was there for about a year. Then moved over to Deliveroo right before the IPO'd as their global direct procurement manager. So essentially responsible for everything that either went to a restaurant or went to a rider across 9 different regions. Then spent a couple of years as a consultant at McKinsey, which I know you know fairly well as well, working with massive organizations all over the place who either needed to find a way to find some massive cost savings in a very short amount of time, or companies who were looking to completely transform their operating model and restart procurement from its foundation to create a best model.
And listen, I don't know about you, but I mean, you and I mean, I'm older than you, but I mean, we both went down that experienced hire route. I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of look back on it thinking, well, I've got no idea how it actually happened, and I've got no idea what was actually happening at the time, but it seemed to be a really good thing, apart from the
Yeah, I
PowerPoint.
think I'm in love with PowerPoint now, but yeah, pretty much flying by the scruff of your neck at all times. But I mean, in terms of the people you get to work with and
Yeah,
the experiences, the
absolutely.
situations you get exposed to, it's probably one of a kind, to be fair.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it does do that. It gives you a completely different perspective in a very short space of time, right?
Yeah, and you don't. And once you get to the end, I mean, somebody told me the day that I joined, it was going to be the best of the best and the worst of the worst, and it was exactly that.
I couldn't agree more. So go
And
on
then,
then, McKinsey, what happened next?
to be honest, I mean, I was really enjoying life as a consultant. It was fantastic and incredibly fun. Um, but I mean, I was getting married, buying a house, and I told my wife I wanted to be somewhere where I was a little bit more in the UK. So I had a lot of fun at McKinsey, really helping organizations build their procurement teams, in their procurement structure from scratch. So I really wanted to go into a company which maybe was a little bit more immature, but also just looking to try and bring somebody in who had some ideas. And I felt that I had a pretty unique brand of procurement that I could apply to industry as well at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and it just so happened that the Jockey Club happened to be a great fit. I mean, Fun for me because it was a brand new industry, and I think sport from a procurement context is incredibly unique in terms of how it works. It's probably a little bit lagging behind your typical big business, but in some ways also especially unique, especially when it comes to relationship management and how strong relationships can be. So it just happened to be a good fit. I had a vision for what I could bring to the organization, so I joined a few months after their previous team were all made redundant. And the COO and I just kind of got kicked off from there, really. And it's been 2 years of fun, I would say. I mean, really trying to build everything from scratch and leave the organization in a much better position than when I came in. And we're already achieving that goal, which has been a real big success.
Do it's strange. I was lucky enough to chat to another guest, Chris Hill, who'd spent time in sort of, the Formula One sailing and at Twickenham. And, I think he made the point, sport's got that kind of peculiar mix of traditional on one hand, but it's almost like FMCG on the other. It's so fast moving in terms of, that customer service on an event basis, right?
Yeah, and you never really know how far in advance these things. I mean, for example, we hold Cheltenham Festival in is it March? I think March every year. And the planning for next year's festival pretty much starts the day after we finish. It takes that long to get the
There we go.
event done.
Amazing.
So they're big things, and the industry of sport as well is quite interesting from a procurement perspective because, funnily enough, the suppliers that you use to put on an event at one place, whether it's sport, well, horse racing, Formula One, golf, football, all happen to be the same suppliers going around everywhere else. So
Yeah, yeah,
sooner or
yeah.
later, once you're here for a couple of years, you end up knowing everybody who's been around.
Yeah, no, a community. So look, if you and thank you for sharing the journey. I guess if you look at the world of procurement as you see it at the moment, I mean, what's on your mind at the moment? What's bothering you, or what's exciting you? I mean, what's your take?
Maybe let's start with exciting first, and
All right,
then we'll talk
okay,
about
good
pet
place to
peeves.
start. All right.
I think what's really exciting, I mean, AI is obviously the big buzzword that's going around everywhere, whether you go to conferences and events or you're talking to suppliers or you're talking to your exec, that's pretty much what everybody's focused on. Um, from a sport perspective, we're probably a little bit far behind the curve. I mean, what we're doing right now at the Jockey Club is really restarting in terms of the basics, in terms of having a strong P2P system, contract management, spend data, relationship management.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I kept quite a good eye to the ground, ear to the ground, I should say, in terms of looking at all the use cases that are kind of popping up out of the ether. And especially with new companies who are coming up out of the blue, who I met a startup in India the other day who was showing me a new use case they brought out for complete AI sourcing, all the way from putting the requirement in to negotiating and signing a contract. I mean, it's interesting at the moment. It kind of raises the question as to where exactly the bar will end. I think the thing that I have in my mind, at least, that I don't think a lot of people have considered is I kind of always ask myself the question of, could procurement ever be replaced by AI completely? Um, and my view on that at the moment is definitely not. Maybe more on the sports side of anything else, because relationship for me has been king in the last 2 years, so to speak.
Right. Okay.
Um, I think it differs depending on what business you're in as well. If you're in a massive FTSE 100 business and you're looking to roll out some of these programs, you've got tremendous scope to be able to do it. And in
Hmm.
those kind of businesses, you need to work and operate on data and process, and that's going
Yeah.
to yield humongous benefits. For SMEs, I think it's a completely different situation. Um, for me in particular, I think there are definitely use cases which we could explore and which we will be exploring in the next 12 months to see what we can bring out. But a lot of the ways which I think the big businesses have gone will probably take a bit of a different approach, just because the way that we work with our suppliers and the advantages we've been able to get, especially in current climate with the Russia-Ukraine crisis and obviously
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
going on in Iran right now, we've been able to reap the benefits of having a much more flexible approach and going that way. So it's an interesting position to be in at the moment. I think there's going to be a lot of chop and change in the next few years.
Hmm.
But I'm looking forward to seeing all of these tools kind of increase their capabilities, because at the moment, looking at them, you feel like it's by bringing them in, you're gonna push your ceiling out by a lifetime, so to speak. It feels that different. And then if I talk about pet peeves, I think it's probably one that came up more when I was a consultant, but I still think, which is quite true today, which is I just don't think people really do procurement right at its core. I think if you look at
What do you
procurement
mean?
at its core, for me, it comes down to a few pieces. It comes down to there's three core aspects. One is how you generate value. That's obviously your category strategies, it's your sourcing, it's your stakeholder management. There's how you retain value, which is through your supplier management, your use of PSL, your use of tools. And then you have this whole enablement piece around it, which is your company culture, how you use data, what are your capabilities like, what's your org structure like. And I think once you get those three pieces right, everything should realistically be streamlined and you're kind of operating in a model where value is naturally being delivered.
Uh-huh.
I feel like procurement teams, especially from what I've seen, I mean, the vast amount of companies that I've consulted in over the last couple of years as well, it just feels like there's a bit of a divide, whether it's a leadership divide or whether it's, organizations having been around for so long and not necessarily being willing to challenge things at their core. I think a lot of people are operating on, flawed foundations, so to speak, which kind of limits their value potential. Or they go too far the other way, which is, there's obviously a drive to go and achieve savings and value, and there's too much of a focus on that as opposed to
Yeah, yeah.
what's actually going to give me long-term benefit over 10 years.
I mean, I'm interested in. I mean, those three perspectives are interesting. It's sort of like, to use your sport analogy, there is, you know, offense going for the value, defense retaining the value, but all of it rests upon what you did in the training ground, that foundation of capability. I mean, but what I'd love to pick up on is that last comment you made about when you're focusing on value, it's about balance. And I know a lot of organizations are wrestling cost versus ESG, but perhaps also versus risk management increasingly at the moment. I mean, in your industry, where do you feel the balance is on value? Is it still cost skewed or is it broadening?
I think you have to work with your stakeholder base to kind of figure out exactly where that balance is, because you're right, there 100% is a balance. For us, in terms of event delivery, if you chat to any stakeholder in my business, the first thing on their mind is, are we going to have the right thing in place to be able to hold an event? Now, that's true for every single business, but for us, it's a little bit more important just because of the size of these events and the amount of revenue you're bringing in. By the time you get 3 months out, everything pretty much needs to be perfect. But when I talk about balance, it's, for example, if I use us in the sporting world, a lot of it is about timing. So we might have a very small part in our season where we can focus on value added strategic initiatives. Whilst we're racing, that's the time for me to go and focus on how we actually bringing this function forward and what are we doing ourselves to progress policy, to progress P2P implementation, to progress contract collection and visibility, and building the processes in place that kind of manage your pipeline, so to speak. So it's a really fine balance to take, especially when I think if you enter a new organization as head of procurement, the first question that normally comes to you is, well, how much money are you going to save this year? And the natural response from most procurement leaders is to take that target back, and then the team says, "Oh, it's an unrealistic target." I've I've taken a very different approach, which is to say, if we get an unrealistic target, let's either one explore how we make it realistic, or two, let's understand, where exactly this figure's coming from. I think that's what a lot of people don't do. I think procurement needs to stand its ground a little bit more and actually challenge some of the assumptions coming in and understand what exactly the organization wants from it. If an organization says, actually, my focus this year is X amount of savings, and that's the only thing you're going to be based on, then we'll find a way to do that. But again, my perspective is 5-10 years of value is going to be more effective than picking off your quick wins in year one and year two, and then suddenly you're back to basics again.
Got it. Again, I'd like to come back to the comment you just made there about, procurement needs to stand its ground. I mean, time and time again, we see procurement procurement professionals doing their best on very, very poor data because historically it's not been an area of focus. There hasn't been the investment. And then at the same time, they get given targets based on poor data, which, as you say, in a worst case scenario can be very unrealistic. I mean, how do you think procurement needs to go about developing that I suppose confidence, that robustness to say, actually, I need the data right, and when I get the right data, I will commit to a target that I can deliver without just being seen as the function that says no. I,
I think it all comes down is, I mean, to be honest, Richard, if you asked me that question 4 or 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have a good answer for you. So half of it is, I think it's leadership, and it comes from
yeah, right.
experience and being able to build a plan that is believable and achievable. Um, and part of it is procurement being able to actually stand up and say, okay, what are our actual capabilities? Do I have a team who can take a who can go into actuals, right? Do I have a
Mhm.
team who can take a raw data set and pull out analysis which shows me exactly what my category breakdown is, what my opportunities are, where we're going wrong, where my wins are going to be, what my pipeline's going to be. I mean, as a consultant, those are basics.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but I think predominantly it comes down to leadership approach and your ability, well, procurement's ability to liaise with its exec and build a joint plan together.
Right.
That's what I never think procurement, as much as procurement is a business support function and there is an aspect of BAU, for me, procurement is never really BAU. There always needs to be a long-term plan in terms of where are we going as a target state and where are we going to achieve that. So when we talk about issues in data transparency or procurement not being able to hit a target,
Mhm.
sometimes you have to flip the question around and say, I can get to this target if we do X, Y, and Z.
Right. So
I think that's
very much talking about enablers.
correct.
Right.
100%.
And and I suppose that kind of brings us sort of full circle to that balance, as you say, between tech and AI. AI is just another tech. That balance between tech and the capability of the team. And I suppose one of the dynamics that AI is really challenging is that mix of human and AI in the operating model, because there was a lot of wild talk about it replacing 80, 90%. And I don't think anyone ever believed that. But I think, half the things that we do, I think, can realistically go to AI. But as you say, the other half of the domain of people. But again, in your procurement situation, I mean, how do you see that? How do you see that balance panning out? Probably more human centric, or do you think there's going to be a charge of tech?
I think it depends. I think if you put me in a completely neutral situation, I'd probably be more tech focused. But
Right.
again, I think it comes down to your organization. So, horse racing, for example, an incredibly old sport in the UK, a lot of people work here for a very, very long time, and they do so because they love and have passion for the sport. What that means is when you look at tech change, for example, I think you have to find a balance between what am I going to achieve via this change in terms of efficiencies, but also what's going to work for your organization. And we've had similar bits and pieces here. So, for example, we were picking a new P2P system. There were some fantastic new AI tools that we could have brought in with, fantastic intake and approval processes sitting
Yeah.
behind it,
Yeah.
everything augmented. But was that realistically going to be the best fit for the business in terms of their day-to-day purchasing? And was it actually going to drive better results than what we could do with a slightly different approach? And I think that's what you kind of have to ask yourself. I mean, it's an interesting one for younger people coming in today because I think you're right. I think AI for me works very well with you kind of have to find the best way for it to function with the people in your team because it is just that it's an augmenter. I don't there are definitely some things which you can replace. So I mean, for example, there's a great use case going around at the moment with AI being able to talk to thousands of suppliers at the same time and try and negotiate better payment terms. But again, I don't necessarily see that as strategic procurement. I think when it comes to strategic procurement as opposed to tactical procurement, that's where you kind of have to find the mix. And then it's about what your business and what the people you have in your company are able to adapt to the best.
That's a really nice distinction, because I agree. I think, tactical operational procurement, tech can do that stuff with the right oversight, but strategic procurement is a relationship thing. It's a trust thing. And I think what you've just described is it's almost making an assessment of the cultural fit of technology. Because frankly, if you bring in technology and you lose the culture of the organization you're in,
Yeah,
actually, what have we achieved, to be honest?
100%. 100%. And I mean, there's always going to be stakeholder pushback. You kind of have to find that balance between what's actual pushback and what benefit are we going to get at the end of the day.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely.
But I mean,
All right.
I'm sure there's people out there who will, spend all year writing tenders, for example. I'm sure they'd rather be doing something else, and I'm sure there's an easier way to do it. So I think it's those use cases where there's definite benefit.
Do you know what? I think that's such a good example because I think, RFPs and assessment of RFPs, that's a very current domain where AI is making a strong play. But I think, my personal view, AI does a better job than humans of reading RFPs, pulling out the differences, the weaknesses, the gaps. But AI will never be able to make a sense of whether the supplier and their offer is a fit for your organization. And it's what you were talking about earlier about defending value, retaining value. That's a supply relationship. So you better, humans decide whether the relationship is going to work at a human level. And AI, I don't think helps us in that respect.
And that's where you get into people skills as well, right? Because if you ask me today, my rationale for hiring somebody and what I'm looking for, I'm not going to be looking for somebody who can write a RFP because I probably don't need them to. But I need somebody who has the knowledge to think slightly outside of the box, use good intuition, have rationale. As I said, procurement for me is not rocket science. I think it's a natural field which a lot of people transition into, and I think a lot of people, especially young minds today, can have a lot of success in. I think it's just having the right aptitude to be able to take in information and understand exactly what the tools are doing, and then use that to your advantage.
Well, on that very note, let's think about those young people coming into the profession. Last question for you. If you were giving advice to someone coming into procurement in their first role, what advice would you give them?
I think the best advice is just to learn, really. Um, when I started in procurement, I mean, I didn't have the first idea. Well, I think the first year I was probably spent half my time being confused, all the various what's an RFP, how do you do supplier relationship management, all of these bits and pieces. So I think it's important to find the right place for you. I think find a team who is, willing to train you up, where you're going to get the right level of experience. For me, I think for young people coming in, you really want to start getting involved with the strategic side as opposed to the tactical side. I think it just exposes you to um, much more different experiences. And then the second piece, I think, is just to really start making connections across the industry. I mean, I found that procurement people, funnily enough, are a really close knit group, and a lot of the times we're all operating in the same space. But I mean, I've personally reached out to several people in the past who have always been willing to help me out, and even today, I've got people reaching out for advice on jobs or abilities or what they should be doing to get forward. So I think I think that the main thing is being able to make those connections. And then the last thing I think is really having a vision of where you want to go. I mean, in my mind, I didn't really, I mean, as I said, Richard, right? I didn't really ever know what I wanted to do. So to be honest, when it came down to a question of whether I was going to specialize in a category or an industry, that was never really my focus. I wanted to be a generalist so I could lead a function. For some other people, if you've got a real passion for marketing or for
Yeah,
IT or for
yeah.
engineering, by all means, I think lean into that user experience. But it's a question of where you want to get to and then focusing on those goals. I think there's so much opportunity in the industry right now I mean, cost saving is pretty much at the focus of every organization in our country, so to speak. And there's not enough good people out there at the moment. So I think, we're ready for some more.
Wonderful. Lovely advice. Learn, network, and basically enjoy what you do. Get out there and
Yeah,
have fun in a great community. Sachin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your experience. And if you're watching and you would like to be a guest, please reach out. If you've got thoughts or comments, please let me know. And of course, we'd love you to subscribe. But on that note, from myself and from Sachin, thank you very much. Have a good day.